you.
So I actually would like to interact as a student, because you know I'm also a student. I'm not just a teacher and a practicing architect. I'm also a student in my university. And actually I'm kind of doing my academic career backwards. I finished my undergraduate in 1989, and then I became a practicing professional for many years. And after I was practicing, I slowly kind of started coming to crits at university, and then I started to teach some courses, and then I started to teach studio, and then I taught the final studio in our university, and gradually it's like I'm being drawn like by this incredible vortex into becoming a student again. So I actually was hesitant about it for a long time. Should I become a student of my subject, landscape architecture, or should I study philosophy or biology or other things that I tampered with? Finally, I decided to actually enroll in my own university as a student. So strangely enough, I'm now in a really cool situation where I'm sometimes teaching my students, sometimes taking classes with my students, which is a very unique situation, I think. And I was a little bit apprehensive about it. I thought it would be, I don't know, somehow it felt strange to me to sit in class with my students. But what I find is that it's just so much fun. It's great, and it dissolves the professor-student relationship. It kind of just makes us all a body of learners. So we're all into learning, and we're all curious, and we're all in different stages in our lives, but we're all doing the same thing basically. So that's setting the ground for this talk. So I'm just a student like you are, and this is actually what I thought to show here was a little presentation I made about half a year ago when Beth was visiting in our school, and I was just about to propose to show my thesis proposal, and which afterwards got approved and became much more worked out. But this is kind of just giving the background to what interested me and why I wanted to do it. And maybe I should show this quickly, and we'll talk about it. And also maybe tell you a couple of words about what's coming through in the research that I'm doing now. So, well, that's me. You saw that picture yesterday. One of the recurring response I get for one of my projects, the Rotaskala, but now I'm getting it also for another project here at Sefer, which we saw yesterday. This is a really serious response I get. People write to me emails, people I don't know. They write, we feel a sense of care. We feel feeling cared for when we go to these places. That started to really intrigue me. Why? What is it that people feel cared for? What's the difference between a space like when you go on grounds here, like in the main space? Do you feel cared for when you're on this main lawn? I mean, does that inspire a sense of being cared for? What kind of environment inspire the feeling of being cared for? And one of my colleagues said to me in our first meeting discussing this research, she said that she feels good where she feels that someone thought about her. And there's something in the space that actually feels like somebody took her personally into consideration, even if she wasn't there, or they didn't know her. So I'm very familiar with such a feeling myself of being cared for, but where I feel most cared for is in the desert. Like I always feel this incredible sense of relief when I get out there, to this open space and just be in the desert. There's something about that landscape which makes me feel very cared for. And it's not so obvious. It's not a very, some people may consider it a rather hostile environment. You're not sheltered, there's no water, it could feel quite unsafe, I guess, for some people. So obviously, something's going on here which is not universal. It's like I'm feeling a feeling in this environment, and other people may feel something else. I also think that it's not, but the thing is that the feeling itself of being cared for is not idiosyncratic. I think everybody can feel being cared for. It's not just my feeling. Different people can feel it in different environments, but the feeling itself is a very solid, exact feeling. So, so my question was, okay, what is this experience? What is this, the exact sense of well-being experienced in nature and the city of being, feeling cared for? And the secondary question is that why is it felt in natural settings so much more than in man-made settings? And this is something that's actually starting to take form, and I spoke about it a little bit yesterday. But both of those questions lead to the question that I'm interested in as a landscape architect. What can be done to emulate this feeling in small-scale man-made environments? What is it about the natural environment that produces this? And what exactly is this sense of well-being that people experience? So these are like the two main questions that hover over my thesis. And I noticed right away when I stated those two questions that there's two types of explanation here. There's an objective or exterior sort of question here, and there's an interior sort of question. One asks about properties of the environment, should there be such? And other talks about properties of some kind of an inner experience. And are these universal? I mean, are the properties of the environment that produce such feelings universal? And are those feelings universal? And can everybody feel them? It's not clear. And if you ask, you know, the constructivist or deconstructivist philosophers, they would say, it's all just cultural, it's all just completely interior, and as we've done away with that, you know, it's like, let's leave those questions aside. So I'm happy to report that I feel closer to 18th century thinkers than to modern deconstructivist thinking in that respect. So mapping the question actually takes us directly to the great Cartesian divide, you know, between ontological and epistemological realities. Exterior world, which is what, let's say, our science, modern science takes, and epistemological or cognitive sciences, you know, like psychology and so on. But really, in our modern science, there is no description of how these two really relate. There is a great divide, and when I started to map the question, I saw something like this: that between the objective world and the interior world, there is something we call perception, something that mediates how we get exposed to the world and then how we perceive it. And interestingly enough, there's also value, because, you know, now, I'm not talking about human beings now, I'm talking about any living creature that has to interact with its environment, perceives the environment in some way, and then evaluates it. So value is not just something high up there in our mental thinking. It can also, I mean, an amoeba can value something. An amoeba can prefer to swim towards a grain of sugar than a grain of salt. You know, it has more value for it. So, in a very basic way, there's also a feeling. You know, let's say the amoeba feels better, some kind of goodness when it swims towards the sugar. It may be happy in a very rudimentary way. I mean, I don't know if we can measure amoeba feelings or sensations, but the amoeba senses something and then responds, and there's also an interior response there. And okay, this is a little bit about perception theory by Hofstadter, the guy who wrote Gödel, Escher, Bach, Douglas Hofstadter, a very bright thinker who deals with artificial intelligence mostly. He speaks about small and large souls. You know, it's like how the soul gets bigger and bigger. Like in some rudimentary creatures, they are smaller, but there still is soulless, would you say soullessness, or something like that in everything. So value, you know, it's like you can obviously see that this cat values being on a nice warm stove, you know, it's like this place has a value for it. And this dog seems to be quite happy. I mean, and enjoying itself in nature. Going back to this divide, the objective and the subjective, if we look at the model of what's actually going on here, then first there is this perception which leads to valuing, feeling, which leads to action that goes back into the world, right? We can see this simple cycle of iterative cycle. We respond to the environment with in some way, valuing something, and then that produces an action. The amoeba swims towards the grain of sugar, right? And that changes its environment because it's now in a different place. So there's, on one hand, there's this cycle, but the cycle is not yet a subjective cycle. It's somewhere in between. That subjective cycle begins when each one of these, where perception, when the thing that perceives also perceives each step of the way as also something that's coming from the outside. So when the perceiving creature perceives not only the environment and how it comes forth, but also its action on the environment, then those two things are now being fed into, like a loop, into the perception. And that just keeps on going back, and like you can see it's like a spiral upward of perception, of perception, of perception. And Douglas Hofstadter calls that, his latest book is called I Am a Strange Loop, which is a great title, I think, to exactly describe this kind of strange loop of something perceiving itself, perceiving itself, perceiving itself. You can go crazy doing that, but that's the source of cognition. So what is this consideration, this feeling that we have of being cared for? I think that every process in the living world is constantly, iteratively responding to everything that is around it. I mean, if you look at those trees and you see how they grow so well next to each other, and they don't crash with one another. Each leaf stands completely separately, and they do that because they're constantly, iteratively growing and sensing something that's growing next to them. And so we can say that, I mean, we use the word consideration. It carries a certain value judgment, but if you disregard that for a moment, just say that we can say that everything in the living world is constantly considering, in consideration. And perception itself is evolved in such complex environments where things were constantly in consideration. So I think that this was my idea, still is actually, that living beings feel better at complex environments where things are in consideration, because this is where our perception is at its element. That's what we know how to perceive. So that's one thing, experiencing well-being. By the way, this is a picture from the Dead Sea, in the background, which is a completely artificial environment. Although this is not the Dead Sea itself. This is the drying pools where they pump out the water from the pools to dry out the water, and then they use the salt for making all sorts of chemicals. I think we can go over this. So one of my inspiration in the past 2 years have been the writings of Eugene Gendlin. He's a philosopher and a therapist who developed a philosophy which he calls the philosophy of process. He calls it the process model. And he starts from saying that if our current philosophies cannot explain what life really is, if you take the current model of the unit model where everything is just separate entities, then there's no explanation what life is and how life arises. I mean, there are a lot of scientists saying, yes, life arose out of the primordial soup. You know, it's like, you know, you've heard that word, the primordial soup. That's a fancy way of saying we don't have any idea, you know, where it's coming from. That's all it is. It just sounds fancy, primordial soup. Jemden starts from a different place. He says, well, if life exists, then let's start by assuming that life is. It does exist. So if it does exist, let's look at everything from the point of view of life. That's what his whole philosophy is about. How can we assume life as a basic, is the basic property of the universe, and make a structure everything based on that. Now, I'm not a philosopher, so I'm not going to explain that. If any of you want to tackle with his philosophy, you're most welcome to. I recommend you start with his latest articles and not his early stuff, because the older he becomes more easy to read. But he came up with a couple of very valuable ideas. And one of them is the implicit and the explicit, and the idea that everything is in an implicit form before it becomes explicit. And that life has the property of carrying forward. It doesn't just, it not just is, but every living thing has an implicit in it, some sort of carrying forward into the next phase of its being. Everything alive carries forward into explicit, and when things become explicit, you go on carrying forward to the next. And one of the concepts, very basic concept, is the concept of the felt sense and the philosophy of the implicit. And he developed a system called focusing, in which people actually learn how to listen to their felt sense inwardly, and thinking at the edge. And there's another researcher which I took a lot of inspiration from, which is this guy, Schroeder, which did some research on what is it that people feel in nature, what they like. I feel that this is taking too long. I want to get on to opening a discussion. So let me just say briefly that in my proposal, I assumed that this goodness feeling, so I'm putting my assumption on the table here. First of all, I assume the goodness feeling is a universal feeling. So everybody can feel good. And that it doesn't depend on your culture, and that it even doesn't depend on being human. It's something that we feel because we are living creatures and not because we are human beings. So there's something in us that can connect with that level of being alive, that is just simply just a property of anything that's alive. And assuming that, I also speculate that it is non-verbal. It's not something that can be spoken of, and interestingly enough, this particular experience of feeling good in nature, so far as I know, at least the languages that I speak, doesn't have a word to describe it. You have to kind of make up a word to describe it. It's like, it's so basic and yet so indescribable. So I thought, what shall we, how do you go about researching that? I had I thought of three possible ways to do it. Oh, yeah, I got to the thank you bit. So now, so there were three possible ways to do it with non-verbal. One was to work with pre-language children, like really small children who don't know how to speak it, and observe their behavior in space, and just do everything based on observation of behavior. But that was way too psychological for me. I would have had to get a degree in psychology to be able to do such research. The other one was to work with post-verbal people, like dementive people with dementia who don't speak anymore, but do still respond to all kinds of things from the environment. And actually, I have a friend who does focusing with people with dementia in nature, and it's really amazing what's coming through. But again, it felt way too specific and too psychological, and I don't have the time in this lifetime to acquire all the skills needed to do such research. And the third option was to work with students who learn focusing, because focusing is a technique to verbalize your internal feeling, the body cognition, the embodied cognition, what's going on in your body. So if I assumed if I would work with very students who not only learn focusing, who learn to become teachers of focusing. So I'm working with people who have been focusing for many years and have already the skill of being able to verbalize their inner bodily feelings. And that's what I've been doing in the last couple of months. And it's actually quite fascinating to see what's coming through. Now, this is like really just the beginning of the results. It's not, I didn't analyze it yet. But what I'm doing is completely qualitative research, and they're noting what they're experiencing, and then I take that text, and that's my raw data, and I analyze it, and I analyze it in two separate levels. One is what's the content, what are they describing, what bodily feelings come about, what kind of imagery comes, just analyzing the content. And another way is to just look at the structure of the text and see what's happening there. I mean, what does this paragraph do in the story? How does it work? What's its purpose? So each kind of focusing session is like a little storyline. They're usually 1 page or 1.5 page, but they're very dense. It's very dense stuff to read. It's almost like reading poetry. Actually, I just remembered something I read yesterday in Andy Fisher's article about eco-psychology. He writes that ecology is a very radical science, and if we take it seriously, then ecology would break down the assumptions of current science, because ecology basically recognizes that everything is related to everything, right? So you cannot have anything separated within this context. And he wrote that ecology, if we take it seriously, is closer to hermeneutics than to hard science, because it's about finding meaning in things. So I find a lot of meaning in those moments of people focusing on their bodily felt sense. And I'm wondering if I should continue or just let's open it for discussion now, because maybe it's too early to report about the findings. Yes?
Your description of feeling sounds like it has a lot that's related to vipassana or insight or mindfulness meditation. I'm curious if that's something that you've looked to in formulating what this practice of feeling.
I've been practicing vipassana meditation for the past 10 years. And I'm familiar with mindfulness techniques and so on. And it does have somewhat of an affinity, but I'm stressing the difference between feeling and sensing. Feeling is perhaps a higher order level of things. It's like already a feeling, and sensing is very basic. It's like sense, It's I see, I I touch, I feel queasy in my stomach. It doesn't, it's very raw. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, in Vipassana, the idea is to think of a thought object as on the same level as a sense object, but it sounds like you are maybe unpacking what's in a thought object and giving that more space and minutia.
I think when you meditate and you notice a thought and you just kind of say, that's a thought object, you know, I just let it do its thing and I continue to be aware of my breath or my bodily sensations, and the thought object that does what it does, and it comes and it goes and it's inconsistent. In a way, you're not paying attention to the thought object. You're kind of just letting it, which is, it's great. But that's what you do in meditation. So meditation develops another skill. In focusing, you would focus on the thought object, but you would also focus on what's going on in your body as the thought evolves, and you would maybe try to verbalize the thought object, and then look at the words and what they produce in you. And it's like an iterative cycle. You get into the thought object and more and more, and it's just kind of an evolution. You kind of attain the thought object.
Another question.
Please.
I was interested in hearing your sort of method of understanding what this feeling of well-being is, and how it's derived from objective and subjective and that whole system. And am I getting that you haven't yet figured out how to bridge that back to how one can make another feel that sense of well-being? You opened with the question of how can we design for those spaces, and what you were presenting was very much on the individual and how the individual feels that well-being. But how does that play into design, and how does that play into human interaction?
Well, you know, in a way, it feels I'm almost kind of what's the word? It's almost hard for me to say it, but I will admit that I have designed places that people feel very good at. You know, and it feels great to have that kind of reflection from people. And people come to me and say, no, I really feel good in that place. So I've been trying to write to people and get. So okay, so what is it? It's like magic, you know. You do something and it works out, and you don't know what you did, but it works, you know. So yes, I'm kind of, I have the experience of doing it, and I want to recreate that experience more and more and more, and I feel that's my role in my profession. That's what I like to do more than anything else. But I'm looking for ways to formulate what is it that I do in a way I have been doing for many years in a very intuitive way. Can it be formalized into some kind of a theory? Can we theorize about how to make places that make people experience well-being? Is it at all doable? I have like glimpses of ideas, but it's not. I don't have a formalized theory about it.
Is that where this is leading? An attempt to formalize it?
Hopefully.
Maybe you could do the opposite. Analyze the opposite. Analyze the place.
I tried. Yeah, but I think that going from analyzing the place already falls into the trap of the trap of separating interiority, exteriority, which is so typical of our cognitive state. But we always separate interiority, exteriority, and we are so used to, okay, let's look at the space as if the space is separate from us, as if it stands on its own. And I think a lot of such studies have been done, so I'm not sure that would lead to, I mean, the studies that I've looked at, looking at just the qualities of place, somehow they lead to a kind of a dead end. It's like,
No, but what I'm saying, for example, I want to talk with the Igualada cemetery of...
yes, I've been there. Yeah.
I think that everybody that
Goes there feels something. Right. So how would you go about researching that? What is it about the Igualada?
Yeah, maybe you could ask, because for example, I was inviting a group of French people there, and they saw the pictures and said, no, it's not our style. But I insisted, you have to go there. And they were absolutely fascinated.
Right.
And everybody that goes there, I've been there for 4 or 5 times.
Yes.
I feel something special. And the why I am feeling.
So that is, exactly, I totally agree. And I think that the way to go about it, at least my way, would be to actually talk to the people who go to Igualada Cemetery and find out as much as I can about their inner experience. And actually to try to follow them in the cemetery and say, okay, and actually it would be nice to do people who are more experienced, that feeling their felt sense, so that they could say at the moment that they're experiencing something, be enough conscious of it so that they could report, wow, I'm suddenly feeling something like in my chest, like that. And where are you now? What's around you? Let's have a look at that. So that's exactly the kind of research I'm doing. It's like taking people out to nature, because I don't have the Igualada Cemetery close by. I would take them.
But maybe you could ask somebody to do the research for you, because for me it's
you're
a special place.
Right.
It's a place where everybody is affected.
I totally agree, and I can report even as we speak. This is, by the way, an interesting part of the research, that you can do it also from memory. You can, and this is amazing, you can visit a place from memory and experience very similar bodily feelings. Like Teresa is now, I know that you're now feeling it, I can see it in your eyes. So I can feel it too. It's like having been to Igualada, and which was the best, I mean not the best, but where I really felt my heart open like this was in the chapel. When you go into the chapel and it's unfinished, and there are all these pieces in the ceiling, the holes in the ceiling and the light coming through, there's something there that, I don't know, it's really took my breath away. And there's something about the unfinishedness of it, that it's unfinished, that holds so much. And it's tragic in a way that it's unfinished. But the unfinishedness of it,
it's powerful.
It's so very powerful. And there's something about unfinished creations, which somehow brings back this kind of power of nature to be present. There's something like, the Michelangelo sculpture of this Atlas trying to struggle out of a rock, and part of the rock is that the sculpture is unfinished, and somehow that's much more powerful than the sculptures that are finished and perfect and complete.
I totally agree. Here there is to the
unfinishedness of things.
Sure.
So
unfinished drawings, unfinished paint.
Yeah, because I think, okay, so there's something that, unfinished careers. What?
The Picasso quote that's talking about is saying to finish something is to kill it.
Yeah, I agree.
Isn't it so?
You kill it, yeah.
So one of the things about professionally, I'm always being accused by my project managers that you never finish anything. It's like you put out your drawings and then you go on changing them, and they're always accusing me for not finishing, but I actually think that's maybe part of the secret of the quality, that it's okay for things to go on evolving. That's the way that's what they do in reality. Things just evolve all the time. So why stop it at your shop drawings? There's no reason.
But I think that it's very important the role of the designer.
Yes.
Maybe yesterday in your lecture I thought that maybe I was missing a little bit this. I don't know. I think that the picture where the children were playing,
Yeah.
just in this chaos landscape, it was
Not enough focus on the actual design and the design structure and
yeah, but maybe the
objects.
design it was not necessary at the. It could be a part not designed or just
I think-
design.
Yes.
Just I don't know what to say. Because if not, if I'm going now to this park, how I'm gonna do it?
I'd love to know.
I'm 45, because sometimes I think that, okay, we design places because children and because of people, but what about the people that is working every day and we don't have time? I would compare your park with the Michael Van Valkenburg park in New York. This Discovery, it's
Yeah.
quite similar. You know, this is
Which one?
What was this?
Brooklyn Bridge Park?
Which one?
This that has these rocks, this wall.
Teardrop.
Teardrop.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know that one.
It's-
I haven't been there, but I've seen pictures.
It's quite similar, no? But
I hope so.
Well, I always see the picture with children, and what about the hard workers that we are from 25 to 50, that we don't have time to play with water, we just
Yeah, of course.
we just
No, I understand.
have a bad life.
Most of the reports that I got from people, and this is quite a lot of people, it's like over 10 people that I don't know that have just written me, or people that wrote about it, articles in the newspaper. These are not children. These are people at our age and older who have had that experience of coming to that park and feeling that they have a moment of something that feeds them. An interesting thing also that research shows that people who go out like for a vacation in nature experience a long-lasting effect of like the vacation. The vacation time kind of feeds them for quite a while after their vacation. I'm talking about hard research that was done on. I can't quote now the numbers, the research, the sources, but I did read it in articles that nature somehow does provide us something that's long-lasting, rather than like vacation, going to parties and experience something like very intense, but maybe less long-lasting effect. And so I've been hearing from people that this park somehow has a long-lasting effect on them. It's like it changes their quality of life. So there's questions.
Can you speak about what I perceive to be two contradictory ways that you were talking about nature over the course of the conversation today and the lecture yesterday? Because on the one hand, it seems from your outline of the thesis that you're interested in how one creates the effects of being in nature in the city. That seemed to be the narrative there. And yet yesterday you were really clear that when you talk about nature, you're not talking about the stuff of nature, trees, water, et cetera, but something else. And yet right now I feel like I can't tell what it is.
Okay.
And
So that really does have to do with, that is a design question. Absolutely.
But it's also a fundamental question.
Yeah. It's a philosophical question. It's everything,
Separate from-
but it certainly places it in the design arena, because I don't think that this quality of, let's call it beauty for a moment, the sense of beauty that we can experience in nature, is a property of nature. I think it's something that we can create, and actually I think that in many times the sensation people feel when exposed to art, to good art, is very similar to that sensation. And neurological science actually shows that it's very similar neurons and similar areas in the brain that react to art and to nature. So yes, there is a very I don't know yet enough about it to say so, but I strongly sense that it's going that way, that it is not nature that has the property, but it's something about the property of how we perceive things and how we perceive certain types of things. And that's why I think that we can recreate and create places that make us feel good. And while we just discovered one part, one element in them, that they have to be unfinished. So,
is this room nature? Like, what is this nature that you're talking about?
The nature that I'm talking about is anything, as far as I'm concerned, nature is anything that's not interfered with. Where a process takes place, the elements, usually it's the elements, but it could also be many people. But where things where processes take place and they're not interfered with, and they're allowed to just take their own outcome, to become what they need to become. Something happens to form, which transforms it, and it becomes, it holds like a richer meaning. And I think that it has to do with the difference between conceptualized and non-conceptualized spaces. And as architects, we conceptualize space all the time, so we come with a lot of concepts about it. And there is something about very conceptualized space that doesn't have that quality. It is somehow flat. It doesn't have this very rich meaning that places that are not conceptualized kind of are imbued with. Somehow they're like it's the meaning coming from above or the meaning coming from below.
Well, I think that's a different conversation. Because when you go from what you described before, which you also referred to as the animate or animistic quality of nature, which I think is a helpful term, because that's something that we completely abandon with this whole modern science deliberations on nature.
I can barely hear you. Can you speak louder?
The animistic quality
yes.
of nature. I'm interested in that idea relative to the precognitive that you're referring to. That's how we perceive it, right? I think that is the critical link. And if you then go on to conceptualize, that's already cognitive, then you already left that conversation.
I'm not sure I follow you.
I think the conceptualized or not conceptualized space is a cognitive category, which may result, but it's sort of a separate, to me that's a different conversation, that's sort of building on it. But the thing that we have such a hard time to getting a hold of is what is the animistic quality of nature, and how do we perceive it as something precognitive, and we can call that feeling or sensing. And I think that's the critical moment.
So I'm not sure I understand what you're saying.
I'm using your terms.
No, I understand you're using my terms. Are you saying that you would say that it would be more valuable or profitable in this research to go in that direction and to question more about the sensing and what is it that what we can sense about the world?
Well, I think my concern would be that you are sort of jumping to conclusions kind of too quick if you go to the conceptualization, because that's a concept, that's
I understand.
That's abstract.
Yes.
And the immediacy of the animistic quality of nature, how do we perceive it, and how it's precognitive, is kind of, swampy ground, but that's also probably...
Thank you. It's a valuable comment. I just want to say about jumping to conclusions, I am 52 and I've been practicing for some years. It may seem like I'm jumping to conclusions, but it is based on like 25 or so years of practice and feeling it. Most of the time my practice was on the level of this animistic feeling that this is the right way to do it and not this. It's like I often function that way, I just knew that this is better than that, or I like that. And now I'm trying to say it, but it's still sometimes very difficult.
little bit funny because the thing you're struggling to, I mean, you're talking about this pre-conceptual thing, but you're trying to conceptualize it.
Yes.
That's what's the sort of funny aspect about it, right? That's what seems sort of funny.
I got, when we did
It's kind
this
of
the session this morning, I got this crux sentence, which was so great that words can describe unspeakable things. You know, it's like, and it is true. I mean, somehow, especially in poetry, words can say things that cannot be said. You know, and it's so yes, there is, of course, there is. It's like absurd, but it's possible, I think.
I would also be curious in how far, just by pure linguistic terms of language, you know, I recognize how in your slides you always put the Hebrew term next to it.
Oh, I didn't recognize it.
Well, sometimes. And I'm just curious in how far they may carry more than the English terms, because there seems to be sort of a struggle of translating it in adequate ways.
Consideration, for example, you
Yeah.
have
The what?
when you had the slide with the consideration, you also had the Hebrew word for consideration.
Here?
It made me wonder actually all the...
I don't remember.
Don't worry, what's the Hebrew word for...
I'm not sure. I forgot.
It was there.
It was there? Really?
Yes.
And I actually remember the word now.
After this. So. Hashvut. Okay. Yeah, now I see. That's very interesting.
Yes, it's very interesting because isn't the word for think in,
Yes.
in the Hebrew word for
Yeah.
consideration?
Wow, I didn't think that. Okay, so actually, okay, let's look at the word consideration. So it has in it the word consider, right? Which is made from, it has con. I don't know what sider is, but to consider is to actually somehow also think about something, right? It's to consider it is, it's not just a touchy-feely thing, right? What? But I can tell you what the Hebrew word means. So, hitchashvut has in it the root of chashav. The center piece is 3 letters, chet, shak, shin, bet, which is the root of the word thinking, the root of the word calculating, the root of the word important, like chashuv, cheshbon, chashav, and yeah, I think those three words are there. So it has calculating, thinking, and important in it. And yet, what it means, hitchashvut, it means being considerate, being taken care of. Sometimes it means like stepping aside for someone else, like, you know, when you're at the door, you allow someone, that's the kind of action. What?
Generous.
Generosity, it could mean generosity or kindness. And it's strange that the same word is made of the same root of calculating, thinking, and being important.
It's sort of a different way of looking at ecology in terms of, in last night's lecture you mentioned ecology and having a relationship to democracy, and consideration is sort of a different way of looking at ecology in terms of the traditional way of looking at competition in terms of ecology. Sort of sets up a different framework.
Completely. You know, you've heard of Lynn Margulis? Lynn Margulis wrote a book called Symbiotic Planet. And she actually says, this is amazing, she's passed away, but she was this brilliant biologist. And she speaks about the theory of evolution as far as we interpret Darwin, which is the common interpretation of Darwin as something arising from competition, and it's like everything we're used to hearing about this world being a really tough world, and the survival of the fittest, etc. Now she has done most of her research on cellular organisms, single cellular organisms. And what she points out is that life actually prefers symbiosis which is collaboration. And that within the two forces that we can see in evolution, there is the force of competition and the force of collaboration. Collaboration wins. Collaboration is the, according to her, the much stronger force that drives forward evolution than competition. So we just have a kind of a distorted look on evolution because we're only seeing one force, but there are two, and they interact with each other. And our current way of thinking at the world is one which stresses so much more. It stresses the importance of competition, and so little attention is given to collaboration. And yet, it may very well be that the major driving force of evolution is collaboration.
So, sorry, a little bit of a different question, but I'm in a class called Healing Spaces. So
Healing Spaces,
yeah,
nice.
so it's a lot on medical facilities and healing gardens and things like that. So obviously this like good feeling that you're talking about is very important for that. So I was wondering if you ever think of your research in terms of what it can do for people who are sick.
Of course, but I think this is like you're studying Ulrich and things like this.
We are doing a lot of case studies more so. Recently we've actually talked a lot about mindfulness and how much yoga and meditation helps people with chronic illnesses.
Okay, but that would be a kind of an interior space, right?
Yeah, but we also talk a lot about like healing gardens and how, and like the design of medical facilities.
Yes, actually one of my dreams, if any of you is running a hospital and you want to invite me to do the landscape, would be, I have this idea to build a hospital which kind of totally incorporates the in and the outside environment. So people could just walk out of their room into like a greenhouse. Yeah, I mean, my research doesn't particularly deal with that, but I certainly think it's very interesting and valuable to do that.
So can I just throw in what the dictionary says about considerate?
Yeah, let's do that.
You'll love it.
Yeah.
So it comes from Latin, and yes, it's con plus siderare, which is a derivative of sidus, means heavenly body, star group.
Was heavenly body star group?
Constellation.
Yeah.
Constellation.
And compare.
And compare.
But,
So it's like
yeah,
comparing.
come from with and stars, Cetus. I looked it up too. And so it's thought to be like a metaphor for navigation by the stars. So when you're considering something, it's to look closely at, derived from the practice of looking closely at the stars.
That's amazing.
And it may have roots in Roman interest in astrology. So we were all probably Googling different things. But I love the fact, the way this ties in, that
Yes.
this idea of looking out to find, because it's such an interior process that we think of as consider, but it has this derivation from, in a sense, looking out as far as one can see.
As far as one
the
can
stars.
see. And you know the way that we kind of, when we think, we kind of look up, you notice that people kind of, they're thinking and they're looking up.
Some are looking up, some are looking down.
You look up, but I've seen you do it.
Yeah, I do it.
Yes,
Yeah.
that way. To the left.
It's like, which stars are looking up for answers? There's some people look down when they're.
Oh yeah. I mean, there are different, actually, eye movements are related to different, access to different pieces. If you saw the movie Pina, about Pina Bausch, there's this moment where she tries to describe how she is getting into the character that she's dancing. And she says, oh, I just noticed that when I look, with my eyes closed, when I look down, I have it. I have that feeling. But it's not there when I look over here. So it's very related to interior spaces. It's still related to what the brain does. It's all connected.
Anybody wants to go? Maybe we should just make a little break so it seems like it's stopped, and anybody that needs to go should go. And then anybody wants to stay can stay. Yeah. Who was? You wanted to say something?
I have a question.
Yeah.
I I was wondering if you thought that people, especially children, need to be conditioned to this ability to tap into this feeling in nature. If you said at the beginning that it's universal, but I just know from experience that there are many children in this country, for example, that if you take them out to a park, they wouldn't know what to do or how to play. So I was just wondering if you have thought about that and how you would incorporate maybe a population who's not familiar with these feelings in your sense.
Well, my word would be to uncondition, not to condition, because I think this is a natural state, and if you look at small children anywhere, that's what they do, they just go at it, you put a child in an environment, they just, they feel the environment with all their senses, they eat it, they touch it, it's a very sensual relationship with the environment. Now, some children have been conditioned out of that, so maybe they need to be unconditioned. And I think the easiest way to uncondition someone is just to make it available. And then naturally, people, again, I think I have a very optimistic way of looking at life by kind of accepting Lynn Margulis's assumption that collaboration and cooperation is a natural phenomena, natural occurring phenomena, and we are naturally collaborative. And also looking at nature, I think most of the animals are not in competition most of the time. Actually, what sparked my interest and actually completely started this particular research was a conversation I had with a biologist who told me kind of offhandedly, he said, well, that animals in captivity are probably much happier than animals in the wilderness because they don't have to compete all the time. They are well fed. They're not sick. They must be happier. And I was like, a biologist told me that. I was shocked, and I told him, really? I mean, can you show me some research on that? I was like, what? Is that what biology is teaching? Animals in captivity are happier than animals in the wild? And he kind of went on to other things. And then I wrote him and I said, well, is there any research on this? I'm really curious to know. I never found any research. And when I met him a couple of years later, he said he didn't even remember that he said it. But to me, it really sparked my interest in it because I thought it can't be possible that somebody's really thinking that. And it's obvious that animals, and I've seen something, okay, I want to report something here, and an observation that I had in the desert where, in Mitzvah Ramon, where I was living and building these trench tents, and Dorothy was there as well. That's when we were met 22 years ago and helped me with it. And I was there alone in my tent on the cliff in the desert, just resting. I had a day when I didn't do anything. I just kind of sat there and looked out at the world. And I saw a little mouse came out of its hole in the rocks. And a little bird came, a tiny little black and white bird. They were about the same size. And they were playing with each other, the mouse and the bird. The bird was hopping on the rock and the mouse ran around, and then she looked at it and it climbed on the rock, and then she jumped to the rock next to it. And for about 20 minutes I watched the mouse and the bird play a game of hide and seek. And they were not, if you would have asked a biologist, a conservative biologist, they would say, well, maybe, they were looking for food, or maybe it was something about mating, or maybe it was this and that. Now, I don't know if all these explanations hold. I saw a mouse and a bird play. And they were playing, like this was interspecies communication. And they were just having fun. They were not afraid of each other. There was nothing threatening. They were both the same size. They didn't touch each other, but they were kind of curious about each other. That's all now this is of course my interpretation, and I'm happy not to be a biologist, and I don't need to give it better research on interspecies in playing. I absolutely think that if we can play, then why can't animals play? And it shows that there is a possibility that animals are actually in a nice state of mind most of the time. They might actually be experiencing the goodness of nature most of the time, except when they're chased by some predator, which maybe they're still experiencing the goodness of nature when they're chased by a predator, who knows? So I think, to answer your question, going back to your question about conditioning, it has nothing to do with conditioning. It has to do with exactly the opposite of unconditioned.
Paul, this is a really interesting question, considering, let's just say, cultural differences between children in the United States right now and other places. York's child aside, who's out in nature every weekend in the crane or walking around every day. In some ways, it seems like it raises the stakes for constructed nature. And constructed nature.
Yeah.
Because there's very little everyday access to something else, right? And one of the reasons I just encourage you to pick up yours, because I think this link is really the key one that's not articulated yet.
Which one?
The link between this felt sense and then, I mean, you've got like a perceptual argument and then an argument about well-being in nature, but they're not totally connecting. And the reason I think it has so much urgency, all the discussion about ecosystem services that are related to cultural services, meaning why we go to parks, why it assumes that the only place where there is an experience of nature that's profound is in the wild. There's no literature about fragments, small constructed spaces. I mean, things we would think of as having human interaction through planning or design. It's like that. Like there's the experience of art, and there's the experience of nature with a big N, and a huge gap in the center.
Absolutely.
Right?
So I totally agree. I really feel that this is our role. In particular, if you're doing projects in inner cities environments where people do not have access to nearby nature, and also we're living in a world where nature as such is really, to most people, it's not accessible. There is no wilderness, like a real type of wilderness experience available to most people, because most places have been, they're like at the best, third or fifth growth. It's like even if they do look like nature. So I think that it's really up to us to recreate nature experience that makes this kind of certain type of well-being, and it can be done, and that's, I absolutely, it can be done in very small situations too. And it has to do also with ecology and conservation. Not of that particular site, but I think if people had that experience available to them, then maybe they'd leave some of the natural habitats that we want left alone. They can be left alone, because we would be able to recreate something that feeds us in such a way in our own environments. We don't need to, trespass other creatures' environments.
I think that here, talking about that, I think that the word hyper-nature is very important for me. For me, it was very inspiring when I read your article, because I think that I had a very, very strong relationship with nature when I was young, because my father needs to go every weekend to the countryside. We live in Barcelona, we used to live in Barcelona, and he had the need, absolutely, to be inside the forest, and it's because that I am landscape architect. But I don't feel, I've never felt that sensation in an urban, because I think that the way that parks are designed are not enough powerful enough, and me as a designer, I try to bring this hyper nature inside the urban. And I think that this idea of hyper is very helpful to have this idea in mind when we are designing in an urban context, because in an urban context there is a lot of different stimulations. So I think that nature is very sensible, very delicate.
Hyper delicate.
Hyper delicate. So that means that I am always telling my students that they have to hyper nature the process. And I think that it's very, very interesting term for explaining to the policies and people. I am an agricultural engineer, and I had a lot of restrictions of doing hyper nature in Spain because the distance between the trees is this one, this is the correct distance, this is the correct. And as a designer, I think that have to be very strong on producing natural events in order to help people and to stimulate this sense on the people that is visiting our places. I think that is.
We are definitely the same party.
No, totally. No, I am very happy that you are here because, well, it's what I am trying to teach. And this idea, last year we were doing this exercise of being the river. I think it's a good exercise.
In the river?
To be the river.
Oh,
to be the mountain. It's a good exercise in order to inform in a right way what it can be a project in an urban condition. Because being the river, being the mountain, being the forest, being the tree, being the butterfly, you have a lot of freedom. You see the place in a very different way.
So what was it like?
Because I don't have I can in my case I don't know enough about, and I don't want to work with the reaction of people. This is something that it's going to happen always. But if I play with nature in a very powerful way, something is going to happen. This is what I am thinking. I don't want to know exactly what's going to happen and and I think that it's another way of approaching the same subject.
Yeah, absolutely. And also,
maybe because my ground is in engineering and biology and all of that, so the way of approaching.
Electrical engineering?
No, agriculture.
I thought you said liturgical engineering.
But it's different ways of approaching the same. But I think that we are looking for the same, to link again people to the beauty.
Yeah.
I think there's a really interesting connection between the idea of consideration and the unfinished that we're talking about earlier, because it's sort of considerate to not finish something, because if it's finished, it's complete, and you're in the space, and someone else designed it, and you're sort of like the other in the space. But if it's unfinished, there's a space left for you.
Yes.
And if you like move a chair, do something, and you interact with it, there's space for you. You're considered as a part of this process instead of this finished, designed, sealed, clean, perfect space.
I absolutely, totally agree. There is something about leaving room for the other, which is consideration. It's like you leave room for someone else to make something, to actually leave their own imprint on reality. You know that you're not God. You don't create things. You only, maybe recreate. That's the word. So it makes one feel very good when there's like room for me. Thanks for formulating that.
No, and room for this is a very Latour idea, but room for you, for people, but for plants and for
everyone.
So it's like.
And that's what sometimes
I think that we have to be designers. We have to be. We are producing something with a very clear objective.
I think in architecture it's more difficult than in landscape architecture. But even so, I think leaving things open-ended in some way, it can be very difficult. It's very easy with our what?
So designing up to that point and knowing that point.
But it's not only that. It's like, okay, let's look at this space. You know, we have these objects here, these beautiful objects that can be moved around and structured in different ways. You know, they have wheels, they seem extremely heavy, but evidently they do move around. And so you can make something here which probably even the architect who's sitting there didn't conceive of.
Exactly.
And I'm sure that, right? You think people have done things in your spaces that you didn't conceive of?
Absolutely. That's partly the point, but it's absolutely true.
That you leave that open-endedness, you do something that you create such a space that you cannot even conceive what people would do. And that's great when it happens. Then you know that it really works. It's, somebody uses it in such an interesting way. And
it's a system. In fact, we are designing systems. This is a system that you can. I think that as a landscape architect, our project have to contain a system, and a system is it's like the rule. You are designing the rule.
The rule.
And the rule for people, but the rule for water, for earth, for evolution, for change, for whatever. So if you design the rule, you have a control of about certain things and no control about other things.
You know what's really funny about the rules? When I did this park with the waterway running through the park, I was very concerned all the time about the water cutting into the grassy edge, right? Because there's this parking lot in which we piled earth over, but it's sloping towards the grassy edge. And we planted, and I did like very sophisticated detailing of compacted earth in opposite diagonal, so that the water would underground slope towards this. And I was all the time concerned. I created the rule that when it would start to cut into the grassy edge, it would do it very slowly, and it would also meet some hard edges. So I created a certain law, right, for the way water would behave. What happened in reality is exactly the other way around. You know, the water was flowing too slow. It was kind of, and it carried with it a lot of leaves and sand, which got caught up in the grass. And gradually what we're seeing happening is that the edge progresses against the diagonal. It grows against it. So it's so funny, you know, you create a rule, you think that this is what should be done. And I'm not talking about people, I'm talking about water, you know, it's almost, it's an animate object, I would say. No, I don't know, but, you know, but water behaved against the rule that I created for it, so it's
I guarantee that people will, but actually when you were talking about the rules and that, it's also creating some resistance. That it isn't just enabling this kind of infinite set of possibilities for people to change, but actually building in the resistance is a specific role of the designer that actually starts to constrain as well as enable. And that dialogue, I think, is really important. You're talking about the tables. It was very conscious that these tables be very heavy. You can buy off-the-shelf, lightweight tables that people can throw together and do something, but it actually is a conscious act to rearrange. And it takes some physical effort. And that's actually part of the thought. And that resistance actually is something that I think is really important that designers need to think about building in, rather than always designing for the path of least resistance or to make things as easy as possible, because it forces a consciousness of the environment in a certain way.
That's very true.
I think another element in consideration, I'm in Professor Meyer's class on public space, what we was talking about is kind of spontaneity. And I feel like in the sense that you're talking about consideration, it's sort of about allowing all these infinite possibilities, and so many public spaces are just over-designed because they want to dictate the activities. So in the sense of being considerate, it's really that you're being considerate about not over-designing it, because it's impossible to specifically provide for every single individual that will be in the space, but it's more about just leaving it open for the spontaneous actions to occur.
And and this does not mean that it is not incredibly invested, I mean, in design thought, but the final product is not overwhelming in design form. So there's an incredible investment. I can tell you these two projects I showed here, this one from yesterday, the other, the Scala project. So much time went into it, so much also this kind of fine-tuning as you build. I showed just one example of this thing with the nail and the steps that lead up to it yesterday in the lecture, but the park is full of these things, little considerations of found opportunities and response to them, but they're small gestures, and they're not like sort of in-your-face design forms. They're kind of enabling this, enabling that, enabling. On the whole, there is a sense that the place is designed. It doesn't look like it's just, a conglomeration of different forms that were thrown together, but I kind of think that not to stress too much the formality of things. So you can get lost in that in design if you're too concerned about forms and what they do, and you're not talking just about the form. It can happen. And a lot of designs which are very formalistic, I find very uninspiring. I don't know, depends. No, I'm thinking about formalized
in the fountains of Hallbrink that are just amazing. And
yes, they are amazing.
Your fountain, it was amazing, this fountain. It was totally...
But he's completely...
He was the best.
Yes, he's completely inspired by nature.
Sure, but he was a strong designer.
But
for me, it's an example of somebody that is able to translate this knowledge from the nature in a very, very careful way. Yeah. We were designing, Alex. She was producing the model of the. I learned a lot redrawing the fountain and seeing that the topography. No, the topography of the fountain. It's talking about geology. It's talking about. It's unbelievable. Water. No.
But it's all one material, really.
Yes.
Yeah, he liked to work with very simple materials. And I worked in his office for 2 weeks, not for 2 years, for 2 weeks. Actually, our office represented his office for a project in Israel. I was telling Beth about this, and I remember one thing he did. It's like I was sitting there kind of sketching some sketch, and then he came and he caught my arm like this, and he said, "You don't do that movement. You have to, when you sketch, you have to sketch from your whole arm. Then don't sketch with your wrist. Sketch with your shoulder, And he said, "You look at your lines, you will see they come out better." So I started sketching Haifa way, and it is very different when you sketch with your whole body. It's like the lines come out different, and they're more wholesome. So he was in some way kind of aware of his body, and how his body. I don't know. We spoke about this. His wife was Anna Halperin, the dancer, and there was all this thing about being always conscious of not just the form, but how to get to the form. So in a way, it was also process oriented.
We mentioned this last night, and it might have only been 2 weeks, but clearly there's a sympathy between the two of you.
Yeah.
This person who designed the downtown mall, but also designed these exuberant fountains across the United States and other places. He said that he was interested in creating the experiential equivalent of nature. And you might do it with precast concrete.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
But trying to find that experiential equivalent.
That's absolutely.
Few people can do that. It's amazing.
Well, maybe
We have to dance, but.
But maybe the magic is not so magical. Maybe we can understand more how to do it. And this is really a secret that's worth looking into. I mean, there are some wonderful artists that can give expression to that, but maybe it's a learned ability. Maybe we can learn to do it. What to look at, where to stop. How to engage our body. There are some questions here that if we consider them as theoretical questions, that in a design studio, for example, engage your body in drawing. Your whole body, not just your wrist. Engage your whole body in speaking, not just your mouth. I don't know. Things like that, we can explore how to become better at giving expression to these qualities, because they are accessible to us. We can experience the wonder of these places, right? So we do have the sensibility to be able to react to them. Maybe we can also do them better.
That would be a great way to wrap up the discussion so that folks can make their way to the 2 o'clock class, which I know probably is happening. The moms can be over at school 30 or so.
Yes, wherever